Hi, I'm Jared Morgenstern from Connections in Recovery New York. Today I'm going to be speaking with Dr. Ross Ellenhorn. Dr. Ellenhorn is going to really talk about collaboration in the mental health process, PAC teams, which is what Ellenhorn is, and how we incorporate humanity back into mental health treatment. I think it's a really good and a really important conversation. I hope you enjoy it. Please feel free to leave a comment below and subscribe to the video if you like it, and I hope you enjoy it. Hi, Ross. Thank you so much for coming today.
Thank you for having me.
I'm really excited to be chatting with you, and I wanted to start with what inspired you to start Ellenhorn, which is your treatment tableau.
Life's kind of messy. Like, I don't know where things inspire me or how I just sort of end up somewhere. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So there's a couple roads. One is the fact that, it took me a long time to find what I was interested in life. But I finally found that I was interested kind of in sociology and in the idea of what stigma and ostracism does to people. So trying to figure out how to have that be part of people's treatment was sort of an inspiration for me. It excited me. It made my life interesting to be working on that. So that's one road. The other road is that I had a severe learning disability as a kid, and my parents made this interesting decision for me not to be basically in special ed, and that was probably a good decision. And so I've always lived my life knowing that the treatment was probably worse for me than not getting the treatment.
Well,
so I've always been interested in what it means that getting cared for can hurt you more than not getting cared for.
What would the consequence have been of treatment there? Like, so you had this learning disability, and what the choice your parents made was?
Back then, I would have taken special classes. I would have gone to a different, maybe even a different junior high at that time, and been segregated from my friends. And so a significant amount of trauma could have happened to me socially if they had made that decision. And it wasn't as if I wasn't injured anyways, because then I had to get through high school, basically in a culture that was about learning and not able to learn the way that they were teaching me. And that also taught me something, that today I don't think of myself as a person with a learning disability. I think of myself as a person that doesn't factory learn well. And so that's another lesson, is sort of what does it mean when we think of treatment as kind of factory-like, that a person sort of goes to a center and then they're on a conveyor belt of treatment, and at the end they leave and supposedly they've sort of been fixed.
I keep getting challenged in these interviews. It's like, maybe that's why I'm doing this, because I keep getting challenged about, like, I sit in a chair, my client sits across from me, you know what I mean? Like, I nod,
Right.
And I keep getting challenged. Another person was like, you got to get out in the wilderness, man. You got to, it's like, so, when you think, so you had this moment where your parents went right instead of left. Yeah. And you moved through high school. It sounds like it was difficult. How did you manage to kind of ascend a PhD and do that work? Was there a different demand on you in those settings?
I think there's a different demand on me, and I got a lot of help. I started being able to ask for help, so I used the writing center and things like that. But on the other hand, I sort of wandered through life. Like I made the mistake of going where people wanted me. So I didn't know if I wanted to go to social work school, but someone said you should go to social work school, so I went. and then someone said I should go to this place called the Heller School at Brandeis, which is this kind of fancy policy place. So I went, and I hated it. I had no ability to do policy work. And then I discovered this left-leaning sociology department. And that department, a big part of their research was on what's called medicalization, which is the process in which we define people's behavior in medical terms. Right. And it's considered kind of a new form of oppression. And so that was another part of my thinking, especially because at that time I was actually working on a psychiatric crisis team, where there was just a significant amount of this sort of putting people in hospitals,
Right.
diagnosing them and all of that. So there was this sort of mix at that time.
Well, let's talk about that for a second. I think that's worth exploring for a moment. You know, medicalization as a form of social control is what they're really speaking about, right? It's really
Right.
managing people by giving them a diagnosis and through the systems that treat them.
Right.
We use risk the same way, don't we? Right? Someone's at risk, they're
Right.
high risk, and suddenly systems can come in
That's
and
right.
start to manage and control their bodies.
Right.
So how has that played into your approach at Ellenhorn? How has medicalization informed the way that you guys, or a response to medicalization inform the way that you guys treat people at Ellenhorn?
Well, you know, we don't believe that the language of diagnosis is necessarily a bad language. It helps. They're metaphors and they're symbols that help us communicate with each other what we think might be going on for a person. So we're not against that. But there's a thing called the clinical gaze, which was developed by this fancy guy named Michel Foucault, and the idea is this way of looking at people where they don't control their own experience, and you're deciding through your expertise what their experience is. And that's a significantly powerful thing to be able to do.
The panopticon.
The panopticon was what he talked. Panopticon were these towers in prisons where you couldn't see the people in the tower, but they knew you were looking at them. And that's a very controlling experience for people. And medicine has that quality. Medicine is the most panopticonal thing in our society in some ways. You know, there's a new pill that just came out that people take, and your psychiatrist can know you can take it because there's some sort of sensor in the pill.
Really?
Yeah, I forgot what medication is. It's antipsychotic, I think. Well, that's the smallest panopticon we've ever come up with.
Yeah.
And you're actually putting a panopticon in your body.
Wait,
So-
that's
so-
powerful. That's
yeah,
stunning.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, I'm just wondering, is part of the threat
Yeah.
of medicalization, and I mean, there's a bigger conversation to be had about that, obviously, is that we stop needing the sentry towers, right? We internalize
That's right.
the gaze,
Right.
and suddenly we are always
Right.
kind of operating under this feeling of being observed or watched.
Yes.
How do you think that affects people's mental health? What do you think that does to people?
Well, you talk to people that have been in the mental health system for long periods of time, and their conversations with you are typically problem and disease saturated. And so it's actually very hard for them to talk about their own strengths because they begin to take on this identity where the issue is always about problems. And that's endemic within the system, that if you, even the best program in the world that's oriented towards a person's recovery, if you go to their team meetings, you will not hear people say, I want to tell you about the exciting change that happened this week, and I want to work on how we're going to help that change more.
You're absolutely right. Yes.
All the conversations about problems.
Yeah. Yeah.
If a person is only a problem, they're dead. There is always strength within the person, and they have a tendency to ignore it because they've been so injured by these systems, and we have a tendency to ignore it in what we do. We just don't.
Why? Why do you think we do that?
Why do we ignore it?
Yeah.
Well, I think we've been trained to be diagnosticians and prognosticians and to see disease and not to see strength, you know?
Do you think it's about fear? Do you think it's about the need to be in control?
I think you do.
Yeah. No, I'm wondering.
Why are you, well, what do you think?
That was you're right. Maybe I was projecting.
No, I think it does.
Yeah.
You know, it questions our role.
Yeah.
The minute we begin to see that, I mean, there's a big ethos in our in psychotherapeutic culture that this is a person that we're helping assist, not we're intervening on and changing. But that ethos doesn't play out often, right? And so it does question a little bit of our power if we're sort of looking at the person's own ability to change, because we're not making it happen. Does that make sense?
No, completely. Yeah. And I think I think about that a lot because
Right.
particularly in how humbling the work is,
Yes.
where you're working with people who are really suffering and in a lot of pain.
Right.
And they come in and they look at you, right? And they go, I want to get better.
Right.
And you're like, okay,
Right, that's
you know,
right.
I'd like that too.
Right,
you know?
right.
But you actually have no control over that.
Right.
Right. You can be present.
Right.
Right. You certainly have the tools that we all learn, and but you have no control over that, if that person gets better or not.
No, and your best chance for them to get better, though, is to try to find those places where they're strong, not weak. I mean, you got to deal with the weakness too, but find those places where they're strong. Where, why is it that they how is it that they make it through every day?
Yeah.
You know what the term intervention means?
I thought I did, but now I'm worried that you're going to tell me I was wrong.
It means to cleave something off of something else.
Oof.
And how much do we use that word in our profession?
Ugh. Oh, I didn't know that. That's brutal.
It's brutal.
That's a brutal
Like
word.
we're coming in, when you're intervening, supposedly what you're doing is they're sitting there and you're coming in with your scalpel and you're kind of like getting rid of that crisis or that, right? It's just the worst word possible. And they're interventionists.
Right. Well, so what word would you use then? Because I'm thinking about it in terms of would be like, well, what intervention did you use? And, and someone would be like, motivational interviewing was the intervention to cut off this. You know what I mean? That's kind of a jarring.
I mean, sometimes it's used because people are recognizing what they're saying.
Right.
But I'd be much more interested in what'd you do to collaborate with this person? Like
There
that's
we
the
go.
opposite of intervention. Like what is the event that's going on where you're trying to build a collaboration with them?
There you go.
Right.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That is an awesome shift.
Yeah.
That is such a meaningful shift. And
Yeah.
it's a language shift,
It
which
is,
I don't
right.
think is meaningless. I think that's quite meaningful.
Yeah.
Ellenhorn is a packed team.
Yeah.
What does that mean? What is that?
Well, PACT means Program for Assertive Community Treatment, and basically it emerges out of the 1970s when in Wisconsin they shut down a hospital and they basically took the staff from the hospital and the clients from the hospital and said, try doing the same thing in the hospital but do it in the community. And it turns out that if the staff could meet every day and sort of review the last 24 hours and if they could see the clients a lot like they do in the hospital, the clients didn't need the hospital. And PACT has become often draconian because when PACT programs are used, it's a hospital without walls. That sounds really neat, but to a client, it's not really without walls because they live in an apartment and all of a sudden you're coming through their walls to make sure they're taking their meds or force them to go to an appointment. So there's this part of PACT that can be really dangerous, hurtful to people. We're not that kind of PACT. So the other kind of PACT is how can a team of people, where you don't have to see anybody but the people on this team, help you achieve your goals by thinking about all the things that are going on in your life. And what our program thinks about, probably more uniquely than other programs, is what's going on for you socially. What is the experience of having a psychiatric event happen done to you socially, and how do we help you recover as a social being?
So returning to connection.
Yeah, feeling part of a community, feeling part of a family, feeling like you have purpose and your contribution to life. How do we treat that? Because our belief is that most of what's going on for the people that we see that has to do with motivation isn't about the mental illness, it's about what injuries happen to them socially because of it. Right?
Yeah.
Having to leave college.
Right.
Losing this sense of a dream for where they want to go in life because people have told them they can't achieve that dream. All of those events are really injurious to a person's motivation. And this is sort of shown in social psychological research that motivation is injured by low social support, by loneliness, by ostracism. All these things have this profound effect on a person to kind of make their life work.
It's the cost of medicalization.
Yeah, right. That's right. That's a very good way to put it, yeah.
What's the approach, or what are some of the things that you guys do to address the social gaps? One thing that I'll mention that I know you guys do is when someone comes into your program, when someone's going to, and you'll go to them, but when someone's starting your program, you guys go out to dinner, right?
Yeah.
Which I never heard of. What's the thinking behind that? That's really powerful to me.
Yeah. Well, there's a couple of responses to that. One is that has to do with a strong commitment to another value of ours, which is hospitality. So I believe that there's a continuum, and on one side of the continuum is hospitality, and on the other side of the continuum is violence. And every time we're not hospitable to somebody, we're a little closer to that violent part of the continuum. And I know that that's sort of a dramatic thing to say, but I'm saying violence can be way over here, but we're a little closer. And so how do we keep a focus on us being good hosts? And good hosts are not people that meet you at the door and say, okay, we're now going to give you an evaluation. And good hosts are also not people that when you come over to their house and they say, well, tell me about you, and you say to them, oh, no, I'm not telling you anything about me. This is all about you tonight. Right? So when we take people out to dinner, my staff they need to talk a little bit about themselves.
There's an interplay.
They're not going to come and say, I want to tell you about my issues with my mother, but they are going to talk about themselves, and they're going to have a relationship they're going to begin a relationship where the hospitality is kind of considered the norm. That's the idea behind that. So there's a thing we're trained in, which is called chief complaint, and you put that down in your form when you first interview a person. And I have rarely had somebody say, my diagnosis is my chief complaint. Say, I'm a bipolar disorder, I need help with that. The chief complaint is typically about what's happened to the person's life. And sadly in our profession, that's not heard. The chief complaint is written down, despair about something or something. They're looking at life and they don't like where their life is. So we treatment plan around where do you want your life to be? And secondary to that is, does the psychiatric issue get in the way of it? And sometimes it doesn't. So it's just one of the things we're working towards with the person. But everything we're working towards is about their social being. I want to work again. I want to be part of the world. I want to be connected to my family, all those sorts of things. That's the idea behind it. And we do that by doing a lot of our work outside the office, taking classes with people, helping them, meeting them during their lunch breaks at work, doing whatever they need to kind of reintegrate in the world.
Yeah, we've worked together on cases, and I've seen your team. They're in it. I mean, they're in the home. They're with the person in times of crisis. They're available and present, and I'm not going to say unafraid. I'm sure that there's fear, but willing to move through really complicated experiences and stay with the person.
That's right, and that's different than most people's experience because most people's experience is they've got a treater over here, and police who show up when there's a crisis, and so we want as little experience of strangers involved in their lives as possible. And we want to be able to coordinate the care. Because as you probably know, clinicians don't do a good job coordinating.
No, that's a major challenge.
They're very jealous about their cases, And so this takes care of that because it's all coordinated on this one team who meets every single day.
So what's the team made up of?
So we have 2 psychiatrists. In New York, we have 2 psychiatrists, a nurse, and 5 social workers, all licensed. So all these people are trained to do psychotherapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, all of these different things. And especially this thing called mentalization, which is this new treatment for people with attachment issues, and this thing called open dialogue, which is this new treatment for people that have some sort of experiences with voices and seeing things. And both of those models are socially oriented models in my mind. They're about the person as a social being.
And you said you have psychiatrists on staff and you have a nurse on staff. So there isn't an anti-psychiatric stance. It's not, even though we're talking about medicalization, you're open to medication. So can you talk about how you integrate the biomedical part of treatment with the social emphasis?
Right. So I wrote a book that was, significantly critical of the medical model. And the way I was able to write that book was to see a psychiatrist and get amphetamines to help me write that book. So there's
a little tautological.
Yeah, there's a lot of contradictions in our experience. I think medications are these kind of amazing things. It's really kind of remarkable how we refined how to change consciousness through these little pills. And so when used right, they're miraculous. When used as the only option, they're dangerous. They're dangerous socially too, because it's sort of telling the person they're not the agent of their own experience, that this little thing is the thing that's going to change their life. And any good psychiatrist will tell you that's just not true. It's really assisting them in their recovery, not the recovery itself. And so, me being able to write the book was a big deal. The medications did not fix things for me. They assisted me in being able to write the book. A depressed person is going to be able to do better in psychotherapy and figure themselves out if they're a little less depressed, right? And so they're very helpful, but in our society they become the magic bullet, and that's dangerous.
You need this other piece. You need this other part. You need to be thoughtful about how you're introducing the medication to the system. And your psychiatrists also. I mean, I'm asking a leading question. I know the answer. Your psychiatrists are also right invested in mentalization and ambit and these other
and they understand. They're leaders in thinking about
right.
this. They're big parts of the team. So they're leaders in thinking about this. They're not. I don't think they'd use the word med non-compliant. I don't think they'd use that word. Right. They're thinking about how am I working with the team on this very important part of the person's life, which is how do we decrease the suffering because of psychiatric events.
You guys have pushed me on this. I mean, I honestly, I think working with your team has really pushed me to reconsider what risk is, and how do we approach risk?
Yeah.
Someone who's been chronically suicidal for the past 25 years of their life.
Right.
What do we do? How do we approach that? And can we keep doing the same thing over and over again? It's not working.
Risk is a very difficult area because there's risk and there's liability, and these are two different things.
Absolutely.
So if you want to lower the risk of a suicidal client, often lowering that risk means having them build a sense of autonomy and self-worth. If you want to protect yourself from liability, the best thing to do is throw them in the hospital, take away their self-worth and their, right? And so we live in a society where where liability is always often the thing we're thinking about when we're thinking about risk, instead of thinking what's going to actually help this person recover. And those can be two different things.
No, they're competing.
Right.
They're in competing values.
They are. Yeah. They're competing, right. They're most often competing, that's right.
You talked about collaboration earlier. So why do you focus so strongly on collaboration? What do we know about collaboration as part of an approach that's meaningful to mental health and psychotherapy and treatment?
We know through science that collaborative relationships are the most effective relationships in a person's recovery. Okay, so they keep doing this research over and over again. They keep coming with these things called common factors, which are what is it that therapists do across different models that have an effect on their client. It always ends up being around the issue of collaboration. In other words, only 15% of what changes a person is the precise model being used. 30 or 40% is this event of collaboration, no matter what model it is. Right? So that's one part of it. The other part of it is I come from a position that we are evolutionarily built to collaborate. That's what makes humans humans, is the ability to think about another's experience to collaborate. That's a different kind of collaboration than ants, because I have to use my imagination to figure out what's going on with you. And we use language and symbols and all these things to collaborate. So when we're in a collaborative space, we're in our most human space. And I think that's helpful for clients that just have that experience, right? They're back to their humanity when they're in a place of collaboration. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's actually really powerful to consider what it would mean to a client, for instance, that has been deemed high risk for years and has been their fate has been very determined for them, right? And suddenly you're saying, well, what do you want to do? Like, how does this work for you? You know what I mean? Where do we go? And really including them in the conversation. What a shift for that.
That's right.
Them.
Yeah. It's very powerful, but it's hard to get to for the clients that we work with because they've been so injured in their trust. That you're saying, let's have a collaborative relationship, and they're saying, why should I believe that's going to happen?
You don't mean that.
So it takes a lot of thinking about how to build that collaborative. That's mostly what we're doing. How do we get to that place where they can trust us so we can have that collaborative relationship?
It sounds creative. I want to say, like, the way that you're talking about it, and my sense also of just sitting with you is that there's this improvisational, creative part of the work. You're not a factory. In other words, it's the opposite, right? So before we talked about this idea of kind of factory treatment. And in your setting, much more creative, you would say.
Individualized and creative, right? Every person's different, so you're always trying to think about them differently.
Right.
With these ideas still in your head,
Is that the frame then?
Yeah, but with the idea of what's the diagnosis? What's the, where does this pattern match other people? You don't want to put all that away.
Yeah.
But you're trying to figure out who is this individual.
You know why people may not do what you're doing? It's harder.
Yeah.
It's much harder to hold one part, which is the diagnosis and the kind of the medical piece and the improvisational human experience. It's hard. It's easier to just kind of cookie cutter it.
Yeah.
I mean, right?
No, I mean, I would put it more generally that it's harder to be alive than shut down.
Yes.
I mean, that's really, that's all of us should be striving for every day feeling vibrant and alive. But that takes a significant amount of energy, and it's just easier to be numb. And all of us live that way, including clinicians, that, just let me just get through my day. I don't really want to I don't want to do the work of being alive. And trying to keep that aliveness going is sort of part of our job as leaders in these organizations. How do you keep people kind of alive and curious and engaged? It takes a lot of work.
A ton of work.
For all of us to be that way.
You're also making me think that to be alive is to suffer.
Is to suffer, right.
So
that's right.
It's not just joy.
That's right.
Being enlivened means suffering and experiencing suffering. And how do you accept and incorporate that into the experience of living?
Right. And it's very interesting you say that, because when you meet people who are significantly alive, in other words, they're engaged in life in a way where all day long they're suffering and feeling, we typically call those people crazy too. So right?
Right.
So
we sort of accepted it in the medical field.
Right.
But in the same time, I think that a lot of our work for too long has been about feeling better. Which
That's
I don't
right.
think
That's a
is
very good point.
A great goal.
No.
Maybe feeling more connected.
Right.
Feeling part of a community. That's
right.
good, but feeling better, I don't know, man.
No, that's right.
No.
Right. The goal is meaningfulness.
Right.
But meaningfulness has nothing to do with happiness. They're not the same thing.
Right.
Right?
Right, they're not the same thing.
Right. For me, what you're describing is not about our field only. It's about hypercapitalism. It's about a period of time where if everybody feels like there's something they're supposed to attain that they can't attain, happiness, they're all becoming kind of clones because they're working towards this thing they can't have, and they're very persuadable by products because this is the thing that's going to make me happy. This is because something's wrong with me that I'm not feeling happy. Right.
We're sold that.
Right. And so we sort of sell starvation. We sell this need to fill oneself, and then we don't fill it. And so we all suffer from that.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. And Ross Harris's book, The Happiness Trap.
Right. Yeah.
This idea of this endless pursuit, exhausting pursuit of happiness.
Right.
Where you end up just tired,
sad,
and empty.
Right. And then there's this pursuit of fulfillment.
Right.
Just it's just another word.
Right.
Pursuit of meaning, I get.
Yeah, meaning, right? Because meaning doesn't always feel good.
No.
Right. We both engage in meaningful work. It doesn't always feel good,
and it doesn't always feel fulfilling.
No, no. Sometimes it can be quite emptying.
Right. So that's sort of where I feel like I want to head in life. Yeah.
What is it that someone who's looking for treatment services or thinking about it? What is it that you want them to understand about how you'd work with them?
I guess I feel that there aren't a lot of places out there that are really thinking about the whole person. There's a lot of places that claim they do whole person work or holistic work, and they have those little rocks, they have like the 3 rocks on top of each other, and they claim that they're doing this sort of whole person. And nobody talks about the bigger rock. The bigger rock is society, social experience. So what happens when you combine that with a very robust thinking about what's happening to the person psychiatrically too? And that's what we do, I think, differently, is we're thinking about both things at the same time. And then as an alternative to a person being sequestered, right? Instead of being in a residence, we can be that residence for a person, and they can live their life in their own place. So they're not going through that potential injury of being placed somewhere, outside their community, away from others and that sort of thing.
It's an incredible opportunity for someone to heal in their environment.
Right. And what we have found is that people who are having significantly difficult experiences actually do better not around other people in a milieu.
Right. The iatrogenic risk. Right?
Yes, that's exactly right. And that we work with people that are having really significant problems, and they seem to do better not being in places. So it's not like we take easy cases. We take very difficult situations.
No, I know that.
And that this might be the best kind of care for people who are having difficult situations.
But it's enlivening. I mean, even just like we laughed, right?
Yeah.
Because it's enlivening. There's something like, it's like these are messy experiences,
right?
And they're human,
right?
And there's an enlivening experience there in the work,
right?
Where you're in it, what
right.
I mean, and we've chosen to be in it, and that's really powerful,
right?
As a provider.
Yeah, I agree. And part of that, what's enlivening is not that we always see it or talk about it, but we're dealing with people who are creatively trying to figure out how to live a life with all these barriers in front of them. And they're doing sometimes things that don't make sense to us, but they're creative at least. Right. They're coming up with these ideas about how to make their lives work despite all of this ostracism and stigma and the psychiatric stuff going on. Right. They're trying to figure this out, and it's actually watching people be creative.
Yeah. I always say it's like in this culture to have an opportunity to get paid to relate to somebody is like, what a gift. Right, I mean, right, I'm not pushing paper around. Right. I'm not moving stocks and bonds, which I wouldn't be able to do anyway. I mean, like really being able to sit across from someone and care about them, and that's your job.
Yeah.
Come on.
I know.
So let me ask you, how do you understand the word recovery?
I feel fortunate that we live in a field that has had a group of people who are treated by this field fight for their rights because they've taught us so much. Mm-hmm. I hope that the addiction field finally has a group of people from the addiction field that fights for their rights, because there really isn't that in that field. And what they've taught us is that recovery has to do with hope, and that people don't change and build their lives without having hope, and that our work really should be focused on some level on what it means to be afraid of hope, and how do we help a person have hope in themselves again, because they've been met with so many significant disappointments. So for me, recovery is really the recovery of this central human thing, which is hope, and it's rebuilding that, and that can be done with this peer work where there's no clinicians around, but it can also be done by us clinicians if we're sensitive to what we've learned from that movement, right? Which is that so much of what we're seeing in front of us isn't a psychiatric issue. It's a person dealing with the pain of losing hope, with despair, and also being afraid of hoping again. That's a lot of what's happening in front of us.
It's really powerful.
Yeah.
I ask that question of everybody I speak with, about recovery, because I'm wrestling with what I think it means. That was not, that's the first time that someone's really brought up the word hope in response to the term recovery. People talk about connection a lot. When they talk about recovery.
That's important.
Maybe
I should have said connection.
No, right answer. No right answer. But that's baked into the cake in some ways in your approach. Right, connection and collaboration. So you think about recovery, recovering hope, right? Recovering their humanness. Right. Is really what you're talking about, and you're really talking about it from the perspective, in some ways, of someone who's had severe and persistent mental illness, where so much of that humanity was stripped away.
That's right.
By these systems.
Right.
Very powerful.
Right. And I would add to that, just when you connect with another in an honest way, you're acting on your hope. There's no connection without hope.
Right.
You're taking a moment of hope meaning I am going to exist intact with this person while I interact with them. Right. And faith too, which is, I don't know if I can trust this person, but I'm having faith that we can have this interaction. That all attachment has to do with hope and faith. That those are the fundamental building blocks for being able to attach.
Agreed. That's beautiful. Yeah, I agree. Yeah. What are you reading or watching or experiencing nowadays that inspires you?
We moved to New York in October, and I feel naive saying this, but I'm being reminded of the cathartic experience of theater and the meaning-making event of theater, and the level of mindfulness that happens when you're captured in a group. When one group is performing for another group, it's a beautiful giving. It's expensive giving, but it's a giving experience.
New York, it's expensive.
You know?
Yeah.
But it's this giving experience. It's a gift giving experience. It's profound and yeah.
And collaborative.
And collaborative.
Right. You have the team on the stage.
That's right.
That are collaborating with one another to create this story.
That's right.
And you have the audience that collaborates in the belief, right, that this is what's happening right now.
That's a very good point.
You know, everybody's participating in theater.
Right. That's a very good point.
Which is powerful.
Yeah, I think that that's right. And I think that that's part of what you're witnessing in theater is not just the play, but the joy of watching people collaborate. It's the same thing, like I've said before, in jazz. Like, it's not just the music that you're watching. You're watching an event of collaboration. Collaborating is the most human event possible, so you're watching it. It's this presentation of how it's done.
How can people watching or listening learn more about Ellenhorn? Where could they go?
Ellenhorn.com.
Oh, man. Complicated. You made it hard.
Yeah.
And we'll put that information underneath the video. Ross, thank you so much for coming today. I appreciate it.
It was great, man.
And hopefully we can have you on again.
I'd love that.
Okay.